Okay. All right, so standard out, standard in, standard error. Okay. Anything else that you guys want to talk about?
If you can just touch on like console.assert.
Okay. All right, what else? All right. Anything else?
Those inches count. Jesus.
Okay. All right, let's, okay, so standard out, standard in, and standard error. Kelsey, did you have any context for this?
Well, not really. I mean, just that it comes up a lot, and I try to like read those things. I just don't understand what some basic.
Okay, so standard out, standard in, and standard error, they are communication streams in Unix. And basically, you can define in your program, so when your program is run on the command line, what it takes as standard in and what, and even where it puts standard out and standard error. Okay, so that's sort of, so yeah, there's sort of two levels of understanding standard, like these streams. One is, how do you deal with them? Three levels. One, how do you deal with them from the command line? In your script, without altering, and altering from your script. Okay, so on the command line, basically when you are, so we've already talked about these, even though we haven't really, even though I maybe haven't used the words, but if I do an ls, that is giving me output to standard out. And if I do an ls Kelsey, this is actually outputting to standard error. Some shells, let me change to my user where I have a more sophisticated shell. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so I'm here. So I'm still here. So if I do an ls, that is standard out. And if I do an ls Kelsey, yeah, actually sometimes some shells will give you a different color for standard error than standard out. I'm wondering, it might even be in the preferences here. There's no way I can make this bigger, sorry. So, but let me just see. No, it doesn't look like it. I actually am not sure what determines whether standard out like gets a different color or is, you know, somehow different than standard error. I just happen to know that that ls thing is a standard error. And one of the ways that I know is you can redirect standard out, right? If I do a redirect, you remember the redirects from the shell lecture? I'm going to take all that standard out and I'm going to put it into a file. Oh, look at that. I got something to standard error. So now I'm Bonnie and I can't write to this presenter. So I'm going to stop being Bonnie and I'm going to be presenter again. Okay. So I redirected all of that all of my standard out to this ls.out. There it is, right? I can, but if I do this, notice that it didn't redirect that ls Kelsey no such file or directory to the ls.out. It didn't because that was not standard out. This redirect only takes care of standard out. It does not take care of standard error. If I want it to do standard error too, I believe I can do this. No. Clearly this is not something that I do much. Okay, yeah, with an ampersand. Now standard out and standard error go in. So they're separate. They're two different streams, right? Standard in, I can, if I do a WC, you remember what WC does? Water closet. Word count. So, and if I do WC-L, it tells me how many lines there are. Okay, so package.json has 16 lines. Fine. So package.json was used as the standard in for WC-L. I can also, and what the pipe does, remember we talked about the pipe last week, the pipe takes stuff from standard in, from standard out of your the thing before the pipe, and moves it to standard out of, or standard in of the thing after the pipe. So if I say ls pipe WC-L, the standard out of ls becomes the standard in of WC-L. And and then I can also, right, but then if I do an ls Kelsey, what do you think is going to happen here? Yeah, my guess is that it's going to print the error and then it's going to give us a 0 because like the standard out of this had 0 lines.
What if you did ls output?
Oh, yeah, I can't really do that. I don't know how to use the pipe to consider standard error, but let's just try this and see what happens. See if that like includes the standard error. No, we can do some Googling. So you can do use standard error with pipe. See what happens. How to pipe standard error, not standard out. First you redirect it, and then you pipe it. Okay. First you redirect standard error to standard out. That's what this is doing. And then the redirect should standard out to dev null without changing where standard error is going. Okay, complicated.
Just curious, back, can you do a redirect like that? Session?
No, just for the particular command. Okay.
Is there is there a configuration file or something that tells the computer what the standard?
I don't think so. I think standard out and standard error are pretty immutable in the shell, right? It's more, but I'm not 100% positive on that. I think that it's just sort of part and parcel of how the shell works. What's more common to configure standard out and standard error? So let's actually move into the script now. And I'm going to have to use some reference on this because like as we've talked about, I don't know Node super well. So Node standard out, standard in, standard error. Let's see what we get. Process. Okay. Oh no, I think this, well, let's just see. Okay, process. So, ooh, a note on process IO. Okay, all right, let's, all right, so process standard out returns a stream connected to standard out. It's a net socket, which is a duplex stream, unless it's referring to a file, in which case it's a writable stream. Okay, so those are very technical terms, right? But basically, either you have this duplex stream, this socket, this thing that's that is going to basically display stuff in the shell, or you can also make it refer to a file, in which case you're going to get kind of like a writable, kind of like what you do with a file. And so you can copy process standard in to standard out. Okay, they're using pipe here, so that's sort of familiar. Note that standard out differs from Node.js streams in important ways. Okay. All right, so process standard out and process standard error, oh, they differ in important ways. Gosh, just heard that. Okay, they're used internally by console log and console error. They cannot be closed. If you try and end them, it's going to throw an error. They will never emit a finish event. Writes may be synchronous. Okay. Console log, you would probably guess console log would write to standard out and console error writes to standard error. That's the difference between console log and console error. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's, okay, so really, actually, it looks like they're talking about changing standard out as part of the shell environment, like you were saying, Kelsey, and not as part of the script. But yeah, so like, let's actually do a more example-based research here. Yeah. Oh, okay. So if you don't want the new lines, you can do the process.standardout.write instead of the console.log. And they're streams, so you can pipe a stream into them, which is sort of what we were talking about before. Yeah, so here, it looks like here they're actually requiring a child process, and the standard IO, which is sort of how you talk about all of them. The first one they're ignoring, which is by standard in, and then standard out, they're using this file, and standard error, they're using the same file. I don't know how helpful all of this is, considering that considering how like unfacile with Node I am. Let me do one more search. Let's just look for Node standard in. Yeah, how to read standard in line by line. So you can just give it standard in by using this sort of opposite redirect. All right. And then process standard in, because it's a stream, you have to do event listeners on it. So when you get data, blah, blah, blah. More complicated maybe than we need to go into now. Do you, like, where do you guys want to go with this? Do you want to stop talking about standard out, standard in? Do you have specific questions, or what would you like to see now? me know what I'm talking about?
Do we,
Yeah.
do we, I mean, it's just, it's, I guess I was first thinking of function or something, more just concepts.
Yeah, there are these streams, right? Things that are, it's in the case of standard in, waiting for data, waiting to receive data. In the case of standard out, you know, waiting to write data. Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like it's not something we need to use in programming.
Definitely as a web developer, you are not going to be using it much. If you were a systems programmer, you probably would be using it more. Or if you were developing command line interface stuff, you might be using it more. As a web developer, you're basically, so this all in some ways is assuming that you're sitting and watching a terminal, right? You know, and you're seeing standard output, and, you know, standard in is when, you know, like I say, what is your name? And you type in Kelsey, right? You know, and then the program takes in that Kelsey as standard input. So yeah, and again, I know how to do that in Python, and I'm a little bewildered in, you know, about what's going on in Node. But yeah, but what you are more going to want to do, your web servers are going to be running on some server in the cloud. They're going to be running on some AWS instance, or, you know, and you are going to want to write to log files instead of actually writing to standard in and standard out. Writing to standard out and standard error. Yeah, so so in general, you're going to be using some sort of logging tool, probably like Winston, and you're going to be using that to take care of anything your program needs to communicate with the outside world. Either that, or, I mean, when you're a web programmer, your equivalent to standard input is the user typing stuff in forms, right? They're not typing stuff on the command line. If you need input from the user, they're going to type stuff in forms, or they're going to click buttons, right? So yeah, so as a web programmer, I mean, it's definitely good to have like some understanding of what they are, especially as somebody who works on the command line, you know, just sort of knowing that standard out and standard error are different. But yeah, no, as a web developer, not super important. Okay, let's move on. Console.assert. Also something I don't know much about.
It's my like specific question with it.
Yeah.
Was, you know, finishing the second specimen, and it seems like it's to do some sort of testing, like.
Yeah. So let's look at this. So it says, no. All right, so basically write an error message to the console if the assertion is false. If the assertion is true, nothing happens. So basically, let's go back to our simple add test that, that Celeste hates. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, so let's go to okay, so here's my demo, and I'm just going to say I'm going to do okay. So now if I am going to, and I want to know whether or not this works, so I can say console.assert let's see, add 4 or 5 and 6. is equal to 11. So the first thing it needs is some sort of Boolean expression, something that can be true or false. And then the second thing it takes is a message if it's false. So if this was false, I'm going to say 5 plus 6 does not equal 11. That's what I'm going to say. So now if I don't want that to be done with that text. Now I should get better syntax highlighting. Okay, good. So just take this and move it somewhere. Okay. Okay, so now if I node nothing, absolutely nothing happens. But if I give it something that's false, and now I should say 5 plus 6 does not equal 12. Now it threw an error. But that's actually not what I expected it to do. I expected it just to show me something. So hold on, maybe I'm not using it right. Let's go back. Okay. Assertion and message or object. All right. A list of JavaScript objects to output. Okay. Message. All right, let's do it. Let's look for an example. Okay, yeah.
But I just didn't understand how you use it in problem solving or like specific.
Yeah, so I'm trying to use it testing. So so can you tell me what I'm doing wrong here, or is this okay? Okay, all right, great. So it's actually going to throw an error. But it says in browsers. That's why. Okay, that's why I was confused, because I saw it would cause the message to be printed to the console without interrupting the execution of. Okay, all right. So yeah. So this is a precursor to mocha testing. That's basically what it is. And so instead of getting that nice mocha and chai interface, you are getting nothing happening if everything's good, and if things are bad, then it's like an error is thrown in any other way, where it interrupts the execution, and you get a trace back here of what's going on.
I guess specifically with the assignment, I didn't need to use it at all to like do error testing. I would just like do console log output to see where things were working or not working. I don't see it.
Yeah. So what you would do, and again, like this is more just like a precursor. It's sort of a clunkier way of doing testing than using mocha and chai, but you could have in your so you can have in your code, you could either use a new file or you could use add context. I'm probably using a new file, although it says modify this file so all the specs are met. But I would probably recommend using a different file. And what you can do is you can just run that file with all the asserts. And if you get nothing out, you're like, great, all my tests pass. And if you get errors, then you're like, uh-oh, there are problems and my tests aren't passing, and I need to look into what's going on. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a little handicapped here because I didn't write the assignment, so I'm I might not be interpreting it correctly, but that's my interpretation for now. Let's dig into something that is going to feel a little bit more comfortable for me, and also I think Celeste will enjoy, and the rest of you as well. But it's addressing her thing. So I'm going to actually go, just want my drive. Okay, I think I put it in here. This was a lecture that I did before you guys got here, but basically I wanted to talk a little bit about TDD. So here's something that I want that I can demonstrate where Mocha is doing some more complicated stuff. So first I just wanted to talk about what TDD is. Do you know what TDD stands for? Right, you are, Allie. Test-driven development. Okay, so basically the idea is you're writing your tests before you ever write your functions. So basically you take your requirements and you add a test that's based on the requirements. You look at the spec and you say, if this spec were met, what test would let me know that this spec was met? Then you run all your tests and you see if the new test fails. The new test is going to fail at this point because you haven't really written any code. But this is an important part of TDD. This is the, sometimes it's called red-green testing. You need to get this red here to make sure that you have a legit test that is going to fail in an instance where things aren't, where your code isn't working, right? Then write the code. Then you run the test and make sure they pass. So this is the basic TDD process. You make a test, you run and make sure it fails, you write your code, and then you run and make sure the test passes. Then you refactor code, because sometimes doing things in a TDD way can lead to code that's duplicated or organized poorly. So you just refactor if you need to. The refactoring is necessary if you're doing TDD, just because sometimes it's necessary for you to just take things out of context to test them, and you have to put them back into context in order to have readable, well-maintained code, or well-organized code, easy to maintain code. And then you repeat. All right, so I have this shopping list command line interface that I just sort of made up, but I might actually make into a benchmark at some point. So here are my specs. So the script should run as ./shoppinglist.js, okay? Valid commands are list, add, and delete. And I can get list, which presumably will, okay, so it gives me all of these examples, and it says the store must not contain any spaces, but the item can contain spaces. The user gets an error, including command usage for any invalid command. Okay, so here are valid commands, and I need to get an error if there are any invalid commands. Okay. The list without argument lists stores, and beneath each store, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to get too far into this because, yeah, so then the list with a store argument prints the shopping list for that store and what to do if it doesn't exist. The add command, you have a store and an item, and it adds the store to that item. If the add command is invoked with fewer than 2 arguments, print an error. The delete command takes 2 arguments, and if the store doesn't exist, display an error, blah, blah, blah. So basically, you're just able to look at your shopping lists for every store or a particular store. You can add to the shopping list for a particular store, and you can delete an item from a particular store. And then it says shopping list is persisted to a list.json file using fs read file sync and fs write file sync. And your program should create this list.json file if the file doesn't exist. Okay, so it's a basic command line interface. And so, yeah, so now we want to start attacking this using TDD. And the way I'm going to start is I'm going to start with this spec. And I'll include this one as well, where I'm going to test that a user gets an error for any invalid command. So let's first set up the project. All right, so, okay. Great. All right, so I'm going to do an npm init, and I'm going to do this -- yes, just so that like it doesn't ask me every time. And now I'm going to do an npm install save dev. What do you think I want to install here? And chai. Okay. And then as far as my file structure goes here, I mean, certainly I need a shopping list.js. I'm probably going to have a commands file that does my list add and delete. So I'll do that. And it says that it's supposed to create the list.json if it doesn't exist. So I'm not even gonna bother making a list.json. Okay, and then I'm gonna need a test file, and I'll just do test.js. Okay, and then, okay, so now I'll just atom dot, get into here. Okay, so now in my test file, I just want to make sure that I'm going to use expect. So how do I get expect out of chai? Do you guys remember? Okay, so now I've got my expect, so that's good. All right, so now I'm going to do a describe and what was the purpose of describe? Like what's describe's reason to exist? Yeah. Yeah, so we describe contains a bunch of tests for a particular feature or function. So I'm going to describe, let's see, for this, I'm going to say, I'm going to describe usage message for invalid commands. Basically, that's what I want. I'll put a bunch of tests in here, but basically I want to get a usage message for invalid commands. And then what data type is the second argument to describe? It's a function. That function is going to contain a bunch of its. Okay, so now we have it. And let's say I'm going to say it displays usage message for empty command. And what I mean there is if I try and just run it, if I just do shopping list JS with nothing after it, it should display the usage message because having nothing there is not a valid command. You need to have list, add, or delete. So displays usage messages for added command, and then we have another function here. And so how am I going to test this? Yeah, how do I run it without any arguments? How do I run command line stuff from Node? Yeah, I don't remember either. I think you use exec, but I don't remember exactly how. So we're making a child process, and did I use spawn? I think I just used exec. Let's see if we, yeah, I think I just used exec. All right. So sometimes if I'm getting too much like documentation, I'll just put example, and then hopefully, you know. All right. Let's look at this. Okay, const exec equals required child process. Yeah, that's what I want. And then you just do, okay, so let's look at this. So this does exec, and then it gives you the process. And here, look, they're doing a pipe, and you know, they're using my favorite WC-L. And then there's a callback. I'm going to do a lecture on callbacks probably next week. But basically, once it's done, run this function. And you're going to get error, standard out, and standard error. Error is if there was an error calling the function, and you know, like it couldn't even call the function on, like it didn't even get to standard error, it just couldn't call the function. And then standard out, yeah, so Node couldn't execute the command. Otherwise, you get your standard out and standard error from the command. You guys have questions on this? Let's just no, I'm not gonna go super deep into this right now because I think it's more important to talk about the mocha stuff. So exec. So yeah, Kelsey.
They're putting that exec in curly braces.
Oh yeah. So you remember, this means that required child process is going to be an object. And I just want to pull out the thing that has the key exec, and I want to call it exec in mine. So actually, I could have done exactly the same thing here, like this. Either way. Okay, so now I'm going to do exec, and I'm going to do / shopping list.js. And then the second thing was that callback with an error, a standard out, and a standard error. Error means Node couldn't run the command. Standard out means the command got run and gave this output. Standard error is the command got run and this was printed to standard error. Okay. So how are we going to determine whether it displayed the usage message? Yeah, and I'm going to say 2, and I think it's include, but again, it's, yeah, it looks like I can use include. Yeah, so expect to include. So I don't want to test the entire output message. I just want to make sure it includes usage. Because in my usage message, usually usage messages start with all capital usage and a colon and whatever. Okay. And let's also, as long as we're here, it displays a usage message for an invalid command. So now I'm going to do shopping list JS, and I'm just going to put, I don't know, whatever. Same expectation that standard out is going to include usage. Okay. Cool. So now let's talk about one other thing before we run the tests, and that is, do you know what needs to happen in order for me to be able to run ./shoppinglist.js? Right now, if I try it, it's going to give me an error. In fact, it won't even tab complete for me. Why is it going to give me an error? Do you know?
Because it doesn't have execution.
Because it's not executable. We have these permissions here. You can ignore the first one for now. It gives you special information, like this happens to be a directory. The second block of 3 tells you what your permissions are, or what the owner permissions are. And the owner is presenter, and right now I'm logged on as presenter, so it's all good. So the owner can read, write, and execute this directory. This directory, the group, which right now is staff, can read and execute but can't write. And everybody else can read and execute but can't write. And if we look at shoppinglist.js, what can the owner do? Just read and write. How about the group? The group can only read. Yeah. And others can only read. If I want to change that, change mode. There are a lot of different things you can do, but right now I'm just going to say +X. I want everybody to be able to execute shoppinglist.js. There are a lot of ways you can use change mode. I'm not talking about them now. So now everybody can execute shoppinglist.js. So now it executes. Why didn't it do anything? Because it's an empty file. Yeah, a shopping list is totally an empty file. Okay. All right. So, and notice it's not doing what we want, because if I do it without any commands, according to the spec, it should throw an error, right? The spec said the user gets an error, including command usage, for any invalid command. So right now it's not meeting the spec. That's okay. We're doing test-driven development. We don't expect it to meet the spec yet. We're doing tests first. Okay. So now let's as long as we're doing this, let's go into the package.json, and for test, I don't want it to do this. I want it to do just mocha. All right, so now I'm going to do npm test. Both of my tests pass. Great, right? Not great. Those tests should not be passing. How on earth is it finding usage in the standard out of this command? What on earth is going on? Remember how I said the it runs the callback function for the it, and when it's done with that function, it sees whether any errors were thrown. If no errors were thrown, it's like, great, the test passed, and it moves on. So what it's telling me is that when it was done with this function, sorry, not this one. Yes, this one. Sorry, there are too many callbacks. I'm within a callback, within a callback, within a callback. When it's done with this function, no errors have been thrown. And the reason has to do with how callbacks work. Basically, what this block of code says is run this command. Then when the system has given you a response from this command, then run this callback. But the sort of the wait for the response and run this callback, that's all done in the node background. All the it is doing is it's like, you want me to run this line of code? Running that line of code is an instant. It does not wait for shoppinglist.js to come back. It just runs this line of code, and then it's like, oh, I've run all of the lines of code you want me to. You did not tell me as the it to wait until this callback was called. You just told me to run this line of code and fire off a callback that's going to wait. I did that. I didn't get any errors. Voila. It doesn't actually execute this callback before it checks for errors. It checks for errors the minute this line of code is run, and the callback is run sometime later. This probably would be easier to understand if we had already talked about callbacks. But basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it an indication that I want it to wait until I call this function before it determines that it's done. So now I'm going to put this done function here. So basically what I'm saying is, don't determine whether you've gotten any errors until you've actually run this done function. And now this done function won't run until this callback runs, because it's inside the callback. And it also won't run until this expect line runs. So if there are going to be any errors, they're going to happen before the done. They're going to happen before the it determines whether or not there were any errors. So now it actually fails that. For standard out, it got nothing, and it expected it to include usage. Asynchronicity is really tricky, especially when it comes to testing. But I chose this as part of the TDD thing to show that the test can pass fallaciously, right? You want to make sure that your tests fail when they're supposed to. Otherwise, it is not a good test. Okay, so now I'm at my test-driven development. Oh, I didn't put the done here. Okay, so now I have 0 passing, 2 failing. That's what I want for my test-driven development. All right, so now it's time for me to go into shoppinglist.js and actually write the code that's going to make that pass. So this is touching on a lot of stuff. Actually, I'm realizing now that that we haven't really covered, but it's good stuff. You'll so how do I get? So if I we actually I think did talk about this when we talked in Anatomy of a Node project. So if I do shoppinglist.js. If I do /shoppinglist.js and I say whatever, how do I get that whatever? Do you remember? Process argv. Yeah, and we pronounce it argv. So I'm going to say input, and process argv is what type of data structure? An array. And what item or what index is going to get me whatever? 2. The first one is node, which is implied, which we'll talk about in a minute. And the second one is the script, and the third one is whatever. All right, and let's just console log input, or I'm going to say command. Okay. So it's complaining a lot about syntax. If I did node, now it does what I want. Just doing this, it's going to assume it's a shell script and that you have commands that you could just type in the shell. If you put node in front of it, then it will interpret it as node JavaScript. But our spec said that we want to run it from the command line as this. Do you guys know how to do that? Okay, what you do is you use what's called a shebang. So the # is shell, the exclamation point is bang, and then you give it what command you want to run this script with. And I want to run it with node. But you have to give it a path. It doesn't actually consult the path environment variable. You have to give it a path. How do I get the path to my node? Do you remember? But that's actually not the node that I'm using. Oh, okay, I'm using user local bin node, right? I use the switch to tell me which one I'm using. I could just put this here and it'll work on my computer. It might not work on yours. You might be using a different node. There is a way, and I'll let you Google it, to actually just take whatever node is currently up for that shell. Okay, fine. So now if I run my /, it console logs whatever. Cool. All right. So now my job is to print that usage. And since I know that I'm eventually going to get a bunch of different commands, I'm going to run a switch on command. Have you guys seen switch before? Sort of like do different things depending on what command is. If command is list, I don't remember the exact syntax clearly. I'm getting my parentheses confused. If command is list, then we're going to do something I'm not writing that part now. If command is add, if command is delete, now I'm thinking that maybe this was in parentheses. Hold on, let me look up switch syntax. And the others aren't. Ah, right, because I'm comparing to strings. Celeste, you're always there for me. Okay. And then you have the default. If it didn't match any of those, then now is when I want to console log my usage. And my specs very nicely just give me this, so I'll just paste that in there and I'll preface it with usage. Okay. So now let's just try. Aha, so now it's giving me usage. That's good. If I do add, it does not give me usage. Also good. And both of my tests are passing. So I introduced a bunch of new things there, but mostly the newest thing I introduced was the exec, using this exec here, and the concept that mocha isn't, if you're doing asynchronous stuff, you have to be careful in mocha. It's quite possible your it is going to finish before your asynchronous stuff finishes, in which case you might get false positives. Yeah. In the 1 minute we have left, let's do one more test. So I'm going to say it displays usage if add has fewer than 2 items after it. Because if we look at the usage, add must have store and item. So I'm gonna need the done again because I'm still dealing with asynchronicity. And actually this is everything I need, except I'm gonna say add, and then just, I'll say instead of fewer than 2, if add has no items after it, but I really should test with 1 item as well. Okay, so right now we should expect this to fail because I did not get usage with just add. So let's run test again. It fails. It expected an empty output to include usage. So now we'll go back here and I'll say, how do I get how many things are after that add? What's that? There are different ways to do it, but is less than, so argv for this usage, it's going to have node is 1, or node is 1, The script is 2, this is 3, this is 4, this is 5. So we need at least 5. And now I think I am going to make a const up here, just so that I console log usage, and then we also want to exit. And actually, and sorry, I was doing Python syntax for a minute there. Okay. So now let's try our test again. Oh, what happened? Argv doesn't exist. Process.argv. Okay. Okay, Jared is up. So, and me.